So today we are going through themes and symbols in Sunset Boulevard. To begin, we're going to talk about how today's lesson connects to the upcoming Creative SAC. So just for your reference, as part of the creative response to text, you must be able to show the following attributes as part of VCAR's criteria. In your response, you need to show an understanding of the original text. So how well do you know Sunset Boulevard? You can't make any errors in terms of character and plot. And as such, you will need to refer to specific key moments, characters, and themes in this text as part of your story. Question?
Would it be a good idea to like remember the time and then put brackets next to it sort of thing, or just like generally make it?
Yeah, you don't need to, I suppose, do in-text referencing, but what you do need to do is weave in these elements as part of your story. You will also be able to show that you have developed a voice and style consistent with the 1950s era Hollywood and kind of the views and values of Billy Wilder. And then, of course, adapting the language and literary devices through consideration of the original text. So you may wish to use some of the symbolism of the original text, which we will go through today. To start with, we're going to talk about some of the key themes. You may wish to centre your creative piece of writing on just one of these themes. You want to have a piece of writing that's really specific and coherent, and you don't want to bite off more than you can chew. In your tables on OneNote, I want you to copy part of what is written there in your notes. So the analysis and specific events. And I can zoom in there. So the first theme that we are looking at is the analysis and specific events related to superficial celebrity identity. So these are the bits that you want to jot down today. Yep, on OneNote under themes.
Natural.
Yep.
Under key scenes like screen.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep, perfect. So Hollywood is full of narcissistic personalities, inflated expectations, and a determination to really prosper. This is part of the setting, part of the views and values of the time where this text is set. And so you might want to bring this through in your writing. Some examples that you might want to refer to or things to get you thinking about superficial nature of celebrity in Hollywood include the director DeMille, who is actually played by himself, is inauthentic. He has these discussions with Norma about her script and the possibility of them working together. While he's respectful enough not to give her the brush, he also does not openly admit to her that they would not be working together. He doesn't fuel the delusion so much to lie to her, but he doesn't shut her down either. This is similar to Joe and Betty. Now, Joe and Betty are up-and-comers in the industry. They still have that hunger and ambition to achieve stardom. However, differently to Norma, they're happy to achieve their dreams behind the scenes. They're not that aspiring actress like you see in Norma and like you see in All About Eve. Now, they are more genuine. And that's more genuine in contrast to the vain Norma Desmond. Betty, despite altering her appearance as a child actress, comes to the realization of her real talents. And she acknowledges, even as a third-generation child of Hollywood, that everything around them is all cardboard, all phony, and all done with mirrors. Yeah. Going a bit closer. Even our movie itself. The set itself is a construction. And when we're at Paramount, it emphasizes how everything in Hollywood is not real. And that people will do what they can to succeed. Norma's obsession is also with her own beauty. And she plans a return to the work that goes into trying to look younger and ready for the silver screen. She alludes to the superficial world of Hollywood. So there are lots of different elements you could choose to work with if you choose this theme. You could look at beauty, you could look at ambition, you could look at ruthlessness, you could look at lies and deceit. There's a whole different range that you can work in, but it is important that you try to stay true to our authentic script. Whatever you do, you don't want to change Sunset Boulevard too much. You don't want to go with some strange alternate ending. You want to work with what you've got. Let's look at the theme of control. Control in the text. Norma equates love with possession. She aims to take and then maintain control of Joe, using her wealth and the fact that he is a younger man and he's a man down on his luck. So he's been specifically targeted as someone who would be easy to manipulate. This can be seen in her claw-like predatory grasp on Joe. Also by the language shift saying we and the changes she has made to Joe's wardrobe. So these are the types of elements you can work into your own creative writing. The changing of wardrobes, the gestures by the characters. You want to be able to show, not tell. Norma never outwardly comes out and says, I am going to control you, Joe. What she does and what Billy Wilder does is build up these perceptions using gesture, using language, using costuming. So you want to do that in your story. A final step in the control over Joe was also to remove his privacy. This is by relocating him into the bedroom of the husbands. He's in a home with no locks, without his own car, and essentially Joe is entrapped in this peculiar prison and emasculated. And so that was really typical of the time. So if you want to work in the idea of emasculation, gender roles into your piece of writing, that would also be era specific. Looking more closely, the Norma-Joe dynamic is divergent from an era where white male executives held control in Hollywood. So Norma's control over Joe is a bit different. It's a bit out of the ordinary. Other representations of control in the film are more, I suppose, in line with the times. The other elements of control centre around the power held by the likes of DeMille, the Paramount producer Sheldrake, and Joe's agent Molino. All of these older, male, white, powerful men, it is their opinions and decisions that decide the fate of many of the characters and their Hollywood ambitions. So if you do want to go the path of looking at gender roles in this text, although Norma is quite an antagonist, she is also quite progressive for her time in terms of having some sense of power and control over that one element of her life. Again, these notes are being recorded, so you can come back to these at any stage. Another theme that you may choose to centre your creative story on is love. Now, if we look more specifically at love in these texts, and to me, this was a theme that I didn't necessarily connect with at first. I'm going, hang on, this isn't a love story. It's not Romeo and Juliet. It's not the Titanic. but in fact, this is a story about love if you look at the heart of it. While there are a series of relationships throughout Sunset Boulevard, it mirrors Hollywood itself, as very few of these are genuine or free of alternative agendas. We can look at the transactional relationship between Norma and Joe, which is essentially at the heart of it, toxic. The unstable older actress uses the younger man to bolster her own insecurities. Eventually, she emotionally blackmails him with her continual threats of suicide. So if we're talking about genuine love, this would be the opposite of it. Everyone has their own agenda in this relationship. For Joe, it's money, it's status, it's his place in the community, and he can get that through Norma. For Norma, it's companionship, it's control, and ultimately, it is there that she is pushing 50 and now has this younger, attractive man on her arm. So that materialistic gain that she gets and that real boost she gets from having the younger man. Then you have the other romantic relationship, and that's the relationship between Joe and Betty Schaefer. This is a more evident relationship that has flirtatious banter. And this occurs between the writers at Artie's New Year's Eve party. In this scene, we can see their peer-like and jovial tone intertwined with this back and forth nonsense that only they seem to understand. It shows that they have a deeper connection based on more than fame and fortune. Like many in Hollywood, they have that bond as common writers. Now, this is a complicated relationship. Obviously, we see what happens between Joe and him running back to Norma. But Betty's love for Artie is also superficial. She declares that she is falling for Joe, even though she is engaged to this other man. It does put Betty in a bit of an awkward position, and you need to look at those values of the 1950s as well around courtship and marriage. Also, her suitor Artie is a much more affluent man than Joe. He's already reached the heights as an assistant director. He's obviously successful because he's getting to work in Arizona, and she essentially chooses a life with this downtrodden, out of luck writer and turns her back on what would have been the easier path in terms of marriage. Then, probably my favourite part of the whole movie, we have the first of Norma's three husbands, Max. Max is a former talented director, and he was amongst the likes of DeMille when they were both younger. However, he commits to a life of service to the greatest star of them all, in his own words. His loyalty is on display during her intimate seduction of Joe by Tango, and his refusal to tell Norma about Joe's nightly escapades. So we can see a more protective style of love there. And so if you want to use love as your theme, you'll need to be very careful. You'll need to be able to craft love as something that is shown, not told. Max makes a lot of sacrifices for Norma that only you, I, and probably Joe know about. So you want to be able to embed those little acts of selflessness into the narrative. I wouldn't want to see these huge verbal, grandiose declarations of love. You want to be able to show and build this. Our second last theme is deception. Now, at the heart of it, this is a text centered around deception. Starting with the backdrop of the film. It's set against a time which is cutthroat. You're in the acting world, and there are many falsities that are evident in Sunset Boulevard. The setting within Paramount Studios itself is deceptive, and it is not all that it seems, as we previously discussed about DeMille. There are also those obvious deceptions in the text. Joe's nightly escapades with a 22-year-old Miss Schaefer, but also in return, he misleads Betty. He describes Norma as a friend who was generous when she questions him about the gold cigarette case and the writing on the inside of that. So we don't want to put Joe and Betty's relationship up on this perfect pedestal. You want your writing to encapsulate the complexities of this story. There is deception from every single character. We just mentioned Betty and the fact that she was engaged and then kisses Joe. All of the characters in some way or another are deceitful. The why and to what extent obviously varies. To elaborate a bit further, Betty is not completely innocent. Despite her fresh-faced characterization and positivity, she meets with Joe at night in probably what we would consider at the time an inappropriate setting for an engaged woman in the 1950s. This is a double betrayal of Artie Green, who is also Joe's mate. So a lot of deception happening there in that relationship. Whether or not we feel that that is justified because they have a really good connection, I'll leave that up to you. Our last theme is reality and self-delusion. And I think that this will be probably one of the fun ones to play with for your creative. Sunset Boulevard explores the interplay between illusion and reality. They also acknowledge the role that cinema plays in fostering an escape from reality. So it's kind of a lens looking in on a lens. We know that Billy Wilder, the director, works in Hollywood. He wants to expose the dark underbelly of what seems to be all lights, all cameras, all fame and fortune. You could look at Norma and Norma's fantasy of returning to the screen, which is more than endorsed by Max. Max writes fictitious fan mail to maintain the idea that she is still desired. So if you are writing your creative response as though you are Max, you want to add in this idea of illusion and reality. Joe, on the other hand, is more of a realist. He acknowledges Norma's sleepwalking, as he calls it, as a complete imagination, and he recognises she is physically, mentally, and socially disconnected. Just look at her house and where she lives and the fact she only associates with Max to see that this woman is not well. This is further emphasised through the styling of her bedroom in all of its ruffles, quite old. It's very dated. You have her antique car, her mannerisms from the silent era of film, and then the costuming, amongst other things, to show, not tell, that Norma is delusional. And you want to bring this into your writing. How can you show delusion through description rather than telling me in dialogue? Lastly, in terms of reality hits home for poor Joe Gillis. Essentially, this whole movie is a flashback telling of Joe's story. Hollywood, he felt, was a factory of dreams. He was left completely shattered by this reality. And unfortunately, he never made more than a couple of B-grade pictures before being murdered. We're going to leave it there for theme. And then we're going to cut ahead to look at some symbolism in the text. You might want to use these as a literary feature of your own writing. If you swap to the other OneNote page, we have a couple of things that are representative of other themes or ideas in the text, and you want to be able to do the same thing in your own writing. One symbol that is used by Billy Wilder is the chimp. And the chimp can be representative of the death of old Hollywood, as we've discussed previously. It adds to the really dark, macabre atmosphere of the text. From the get-go, Jo walks up these really dimly lit stairs into this strange room. We know that this chimpanzee and using live animals in film is from a different era of filmmaking. Even in the 50s, this was not really how we were entertaining. It showcases the passing of time since Norma was big. It implies that the film industry is moving on without her, and old Hollywood, as known by successful young Norma Desmond, is just diminishing like the dead monkey. You might also look at relationships, and the relationship Norma has with the deceased chimpanzee is representative of her eccentricity and bizarre ability to cling to the remnants of the past. Jo watches on and describes this funeral under the cover of darkness as if she were laying her only child to rest. So again, a way of emphasizing that Norma is eccentric and that the past is the past could be used through a symbol of the chimpanzee. You may even want that funeral procession to be the basis of your creative. Then you have Norma's mansion itself. And I think this slide will help you the most in terms of setting. In your creative piece, you want the setting to mean something and mean something deeper. And in this case, what Billy Wilder has done is he has personified Norma's house. It's representative of her current celebrity status and of her life in general. Jo noted upon arriving that the neglected house gets an unhappy look, and this one had it in spades. So we can probably even apply that quote directly to Norma's life itself, and it would still fit. The property is unkempt, it's in disrepair, and Jo makes the assumption from the outside it is abandoned. Much like what we later learn about Norma and her abandoned relationship with Paramount and her feelings of abandonment by DeMille. The mansion as well preempts the dark psychology of the occupant herself. It's dark, it's interesting, different, and is very much like Norma. It's creepy and it's kooky. We've talked a lot about Jo's car as well, and we've juxtaposed that against Norma's 1932 antique vehicle. But Jo's car can also be used to discuss themes like domination, freedom, and of course, dreams. You may wish to make this the feature of one of your creatives. Jo compares the impending loss of his car to cutting off his legs. His modern-looking automobile is a symbol of status and wealth, all of which he went to Hollywood to achieve. The loss, well, this is yet another indication that Jo just hasn't made it in LA. It's the end. He left Dayton, Ohio, and now he's essentially back where he started. The car that he bought to show off is about to be repossessed. But then the car kind of changes, not physically, but Norma is dismissive about Jo's car being towed, and it becomes a symbol of something different. Her language at the time shifts and shows that the power dynamic of the relationship is changing. It becomes a symbol of domination, his lack of freedom. We don't need two cars, and she'd take me for drives. This alludes to Norma taking fuller control of the relationship and Jo's now complete lack of autonomy over his own life. Now, you might look at it and be like, oh, well, it's just his car, isn't it? But we need to keep coming back to the quote. He felt that this was like cutting off his legs. And so what you want to do with your creative is to get little snippets of quotes from the text to build up your understanding of whichever character you're writing on, whether it's Jo or Norma or Max, and use those little quotes to further build the character. Second last symbol, the pool. Now, the pool looks at the cost of wealth and the cost of fame. Now, the pool bookends the film, but it does make several other appearances or references throughout. The narrator from the beginning establishes that poor Jo always wanted a pool, yet the price turned out to be too high, indicating Jo himself sees the pool as a symbol of grandeur and fame. If you get a house with a pool, that means that you've made it. Now, Norma obviously had a house with a pool, but initially, Norma's pool is empty. And there are actually a series of rats congregating in the bottom, constructing this really dark foreshadowing that maybe having a full pool was going to cost Jo something. In an attempt to further use her fortune to manipulate Jo, in the middle of the film, we see Norma declare that she will fill the pool for him. It's just another means of buying Jo along with the gold cigarette case. And by the end, of course, we see that shot there of Jo's body. He got the pool that he wanted, but is this really his dream? Last symbol. And if you are focusing mostly on the plot and the characters in your first watching of the film, this may be something that you overlooked. And throughout the film, there are lots of mirrors in which particularly Norma is looking into, but also lots of framed photographs, really representing self-image and, of course, Norma's obsession with Norma. In connection with the idea that real stars have great pride, Norma's home is essentially a museum of her previous life. Her stardom is now only reflected through images of herself in her home, where she has films that she watches as well. Jo further reflects as they watch her old movies together. It's all she wanted to see, further constructing the idea of Norma's own self-obsession. We can see there from the clip that there are so many photos of Norma around the house, including very large ones that are full body oil paintings on the wall. There is nothing in Norma's house that is about any of the other characters. Even the bedroom of the husband is decorated by Norma, has photos of Norma, and it exudes everywhere in the house. At one point, Jo even questions whether she could breathe with the amount of suffocating Norma memorabilia. The other element of this includes mirrors. So mirrors also play a dominant part of the landscape, with the hyper focus being on Norma's face. She establishes herself to be an aging star who is fearful of the world outside. Now, mirrors as well, hyper focus on the face. And we know that Norma is from that era, the silent film era, where there wasn't dialogue in the films. It was all about her face and her gesture and her eyes. And we see that a lot. And that's why there are so many mirrors, so many portraits, and also from Billy Wilder himself, so many close-ups where you can see Norma's facial expressions because it reveals so much about this character. Now, considering theme and considering symbolism, I want you to have 3 takeaways from today. Firstly, what is going to be your theme for your creative writing? How will you emphasize this theme? What symbols and motifs will you construct to add layers of meaning to your writing? So you can't just write a plot-based story or a dialogue-based story. Whatever you write has to be very descriptive, use a lot of literary devices, including symbols. And lastly, how are you in your story going to add appropriate levels of textual knowledge and balance this with your new insights about Sunset Boulevard? If you're revealing more about the character of Max, you need to show what we know about Max first. Include snippets of his quotes. Include accurate depictions of his dress and demeanour. Same with any of the other characters. You need to rightly balance, referring to the era, referring to different historical events, and then, of course, referring to things that have already happened in our film with accuracy and detailed description. All right,